The Zohar says an amazing thing about the days we're in right now. The Zohar says that from time Pesach begins until Pesach Sheni, the Shechina is here. And then on Pesach Sheni, a voice goes out from heaven, and the voice announces, the doors are now opened. Go and see the revelation of the Shechina. Go and see the light of the Shechina. And the whole week of Pesach Sheni, there is this tremendous light of the Shechina. To such an extent that there's an opinion, not an opinion, but there is an idea among different codifiers of halacha about Tachnun. Maybe you shouldn't say Tachnun from Pesach until Pesach Sheni. There's a light of the Shechina is shining the week after Pesach Sheni, but we don't have any halachic result of this idea. We actually do say Tachnun in the words of the Alter Rebbe. The only day we don't say Tachnun is just Pesach Sheni, but that does tell us something about the power of these days. These days are days of tremendous mazel and bracha, especially this coming Sunday, the day of Shemba Yochai, the day of Lag Baimer. Whoa, Jordan, Shechianu v'kimono. That's what they say Shechianu during the Shir Sa'ima. I see you got to say Shechianu. Shalom Aleichem. All right, so we need to figure out that Arizal had a student that every day he would celebrate Tisha B'Av. Every day he would mourn for the Beis HaMikdash. Every single day he would say the prayer of Tisha B'Av called Nachim. And he would say it on Shabbos, he would say it on Yantif. Every single day he would say it. And of course, Lag Ba'Omer, he said it too. The Arizal found out, he said on Lag Ba'Omer, the Arizal with divine inspiration, he knew that he said this prayer for Tisha B'Av on Lag Ba'Omer, and the Arizal said, you can't do that. That's wrong. And he gave him a whole tikkun because of him not celebrating Lag Ba'Omer with joy. That means Lag Ba'Omer has an advantage in it that somehow surpasses all the Yom Tov. And that's why you could say Nachem on Shabbos and Yantif, but not on Lag Ba'Omer. So the days we're in now are days of tremendous bracha. And in these days we're reading Parshas Emor. Who knows what the word Emor means? Guys, you know what the word Emor means? Emor. To say, very good. Excellent. So there's expression that your words can sometimes be a self-fulfilling prophecy. What you say could actually make it happen. At the time of the Alter Rebbe, there was a Jew who was possessed by a dibuk. He had this soul come into him, and it made him meshugah, made him crazy, and he didn't know what to do. So he eventually came for the Alter Rebbe himself with his dibuk in him. This is a story the Rebbe himself said, the story about the Alter Rebbe. He comes before the Alter Rebbe, and he is possessed. The Alter Rebbe says the following story. The Alter Rebbe said that in the time of Zechariah Hanavi, Zechariah the prophet, Zechariah told the Jewish people that because of their sins, they're going to lose the Beis HaMikdash. And he came and he started telling the Jewish people, this sin brings this result, and this sin brings that result. If you do this, this is what's going to happen. If you do that, that's what's going to happen. And the Jewish people are listening to him, and they took out rocks and they threw rocks at him and they killed him. And Zechariah Navi died. So the Alter Rebbe said, why did the people throw rocks at Zechariah Navi? What were they thinking? So Alter Rebbe said, they knew that when a prophet says something, the words of a prophet, the fact that he says those words themselves makes it happen. So they said, because he's telling us these words, so it's going to make these things happen. So they didn't want the Jewish people to be punished. They wanted to protect the Jewish people. What's the best way to protect the Jewish people? Stop the prophet from saying the prophecy. So that's what they killed the Zechariah Navi to protect them, protect the Jewish people. So the Rebbe asked, how come Zechariah Navi himself didn't hold back his own prophecy? The Rebbe explained basically that a prophet isn't his own man. A prophet is an emissary from God. He doesn't really have a choice. He has to reveal his prophecy. But the people, so Zechariah couldn't hold it back, but the people listening to his prophecy, they wanted to stop it, and they did. And they threw the rocks at him, they killed him. So Zechariah Navi passes away, but the soul that threw the rocks at Zechariah Navi, he was in limbo. He was not allowed to go to Gan Eden. He wasn't even allowed to go to Gehenna. And he was wandering around the world until the Alter Rebbe gave a limud zchus. He found merit in what the guy did. He found merit that the guy wanted to protect the Jewish people. Because of what Alter Rebbe said, as Alter Rebbe is explaining this to this guy, all of a sudden he felt better, and he was no longer possessed by this soul, and he became back to normal. But we do see from the story is the power of our words. There's a famous teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, famous story of the Baal Shem Tov. Two of the Baal Shem Tovs were up there, and one of them says to the other, I'm going to tear you up like a fish. So the Baal Shem Tov gathered the students together, it's a Yom Yom the story, and they close their eyes, and they see the one who said he's going to tear the other person up, actually tearing him limb from limb. So the Baal Shem Tov explained that whenever you say something, it has an effect. Your words have an effect. That's in the negative. But this is also true in the positive. As a famous word, the Reb Marash, which I believe I shared a few times here, the Reb Marash said that if you say that someone, because of their good actions, deserves A, B, and C, so then Hashem listens to you, and He not only does He bestow that person with blessings, but He also gives you brachas too. In Pirkei Avos it says, before you come to Shemayim, you have to have a judgment and a calculation. Now, Mr. Yoshua Teig will tell you that you can't have a judgment before a calculation. So how come it says in Pirkei Avos, before you come before God, you have a calculation, you give a judgment and then a calculation? So Baal Shem Tov explains that a Jew cannot be judged by an angel. How could an angel judge a Jew? So what happens, you come to Shemayim, is they show you your life story. And when they show you your life story, they ask you, hey, this is what this guy did, what do you think? And you don't know it's you. So you say, well, this was that. The guy did that. This is what should happen to him. So that after your judgment, thank you, after your judgment, the Bezdin then makes a calculation and says, well, if that's what you said about him, that's what you did yourself. And therefore, this judgment you gave about this other person applies to yourself. So Rebbe Marash said that's also true in this world too. If you say this guy deserves a bracha, then you bring a bracha upon yourself as well. To the extent that the previous Rebbe said that the greatest prayers ever said were said by Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol aren't as powerful as when a Jew blesses another Jew. When a Jew says this Jew deserves a bracha, God just help him. That brings down the greatest bracha. So these days, the Yom Zakoyin, it's important to give brachas and speak positively, but especially on Lag BaOmer, it's important to take time to write a letter to the Rebbe, ask for a bracha, because Tirim Psich, and the Zohar says, doors are open. Okay, so L'chaim Avracha. So Chaim will listen to Refuah Shleima Kreva. Refuah Shleima Kreva. Chaim Avracha. You don't have to say the names out loud, just say the names to yourself. Chaim Avracha. Okay. So our words have a powerful effect. And that's why the Rebbe tells us that we're supposed to talk a lot about Mashiach. Because learning and talking about Mashiach actually makes Mashiach come. This week in the Torah, we're reading a lot about Koyanim. Who here is a Koyan? Any Koyanim here? You're a Koyan. Oh, Baruch Hashem. We have one Koyan in the house. Not too many. Here we're learning a whole parsha in the Torah about a Koyan. How come we're all reading about a Koyan if none of us are Koyanim? What's the point of learning about a Koyan? Reading about a Koyan, we're not Koyanim. Why are we reading about the Koyan? And we're learning about a Koyan becoming Tameh, a Koyan becoming ritually impure by coming in contact with a dead body. If there's a dead body in the room, a Koyan is not allowed to be there. That's why it's a question if a Koyan can visit someone in the hospital, maybe someone passed away there. So a Koyan is not allowed to be around a dead body. And there's a difference between a regular Koyan and a Kohen Gadol. What's the difference? that a regular kohen, although he's not allowed to be around the dead body, but if it's his family, he is allowed to be there. He's allowed to be there for the funeral. If his brother, his sister, his wife, his parents, his children, he's allowed to go to the funeral. What about a kohen gadol? If sister that's not married, very good. If it's a kohen gadol, he's not allowed to go to anybody's funeral. Doesn't matter who. So what does that have to do with us? We're not only not a kohen gadol, except we're not even a regular kohen. So why are we reading about this? So the Rambam writes that although we're not actually a kohen, but the idea of a kohen doesn't just mean that you serve in the Beis HaMikdash and you bring sacrifices. The Rambam writes a kohen is somebody who doesn't have to work. Doesn't mean that he's lazy and he's not working. A kohen is someone whose job is to be separate from things of this world, and the Jewish people would support him by giving him the gifts of Truma, and in order that he should be able to be focused totally on Torah, Tefillah, and Staka. He should do nothing else, just connected and devoted to spiritual things. That's the idea of a kohen. A kohen is someone who is, the words of the Rambam, Kol ish v'ish ashanod v'rucha esei. Anybody who has a magnanimous spirit, who just a person who wants to be in the same state as a kohen, he wants to be dedicated to serving Hashem, he may not be able to quit his job, but he could be in that state of a kohen and just separate and decide what his life is about. You write your life story. Well, the Rambam writes, you decide that you want to become like a kohen, you want to serve Hashem, you want to separate yourself from what's going on and think about what's important and dedicate your life to what's important. The Rambam says, miyad, diskadish kodesh kodashim. The moment you make that decision, you are a kohen. So each of us the Torah says, are empowered to be like a kohen and to be into what we're supposed to be into spiritual stuff. The Torah says, Magid Devorav Liyakiv. Whatever God tells us to do, He does Himself. So that means that if Hashem tells us the laws of Kohenim, and if Hashem tells us each of us that we could be a Kohen, that means that Hashem is also a Kohen. But there's a difference between the way Hashem keeps the laws that He tells us to do. For example, Hashem tells us to put on tefillin. Hashem's tefillin, are they Ashkenazi tefillin? Are they Sephardic tefillin? Are they, what size is his head exactly? He has esrog and lulav. How big is the Eibusher's esrog? How big is his lulav? He does everything he tells us to do. He does it himself, but obviously it's not done in the same way. He doesn't have a physical esrog, a physical lulav, physical tefillin. It's obviously something spiritual. And not only does the Eibusher have something spiritual, but the truth is that the reason we have mitzvahs is because God does mitzvahs first. In other words, the real tefillin are God's tefillin. And because God has tefillin, we also have tefillin. The famous Maisa with the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab had a custom that whenever he washed, he would not only be careful not to interrupt after he washed before having a meitzi, he was also careful not to interrupt his thoughts. When he washed for a meitzi, not only would he not speak, he would not interrupt his thoughts either. One time he washed for a meitzi, and one of his relatives tried to tell him this amazing piece of news he just discovered. What was the piece of news he just discovered? He says doctors discovered that there is a vein in your brain that when you lean forward, it helps you concentrate. When you lean backwards, it helps you remember things. That's why people, when they want to concentrate, they go like this, because of that vein in their brain. So the Rebbe Rashab was washing. He didn't answer him. He had a motzi, and he ate the shir, and then he said, this is in the Maim in the Mittler Rebbe. He took out a Maim in the Mittler Rebbe, and he showed him a few lines in the Maim in the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe says exactly this thing. So the Rebbe Rashab's relative was shocked. He said, well, you must have been a great doctor. And the Rebbe Rashab said he wasn't a doctor. He just knew how things were in Shemaim, how things were spiritually. And because he knew how things were spiritually, he knew how to figure out how they were physically too. So similarly, the reason we have mitzvahs is because God has mitzvahs. The reason why everything that happens here starts in Shemaim first. So let's talk about the mitzvah of purity and impurity. How does God keep that mitzvah? The Gemara says a story about Rabbi Vohu. The tzaddik named Rabbi Vohu was once encountered this Jew who was a heretic. And he told Rabbi Vohu, he says, let me ask you a question. You say God keeps all the laws, right? Yes. And God's called a Kohen, right? God's called a Kohen. So if God is called a Kohen, he buries Moshe Rabbeinu. If he buries Moshe Rabbeinu, how does he purify himself after burying Moses? How is that? He buries Moses, and he's a Kohen. How does he purify himself? He can't use water, he tells him, because the water, he won't fit into the ocean. So how does God purify himself? Rabbi Vo says what he does is that he uses fire. He purifies himself with fire. That's what Rabbi Vo answered him. Some commentaries in the Talmud say that Rabbi Vo was just trying to push the guy off, like leave me alone. He wasn't giving him a real answer. But everything in the Torah has meaning. So there must be some meaning in this exchange. So the truth is that it says that not only did Hashem bury Moshe Rabbeinu himself and thus become impure, but it says Mashiach will come, Hashem will gather every single Jew from all over the world back to Eretz Yisrael. It says in Rashi, on that day God will take every Jew by his hand and bring him to Eretz Yisrael, bring him to Kibbutz Goliath. We'll all be gathered there. It's an amazing thing. The Rebbe said actually that last time the Rebbe spoke, he spoke about how we see the beginning of this happening. We see like a taste of this happening. Mashiach hasn't come yet, but the fact that the Russian immigration in 1991, so many people came to Eretz Yisrael, we see already this concept of people from all over the world coming to Eretz Yisrael, coming to Israel. So it's not Kibbutz Goliath, that Mashiach hasn't come, but we see already the phenomena. We see already this concept happening in the world. So the Gemara says that Kibbutz Goliath, gathering the Jewish people into Israel, the Talmud says it's equal, that day that will happen is equal to the day of the creation of heaven and earth. That's as great as that day. Why? Because the whole reason God made heaven and earth is just to bring us to that moment. That's the greatest blessing that there is. All the Jewish people gathered together. So it says in the Medrash, when God will do this, God says, I'm contaminating. God says all of his garments are, so to speak, contaminated. He's becoming impure by gathering Jewish people. So the question is, how can he make himself tamei? So the Zohar says it's easy. We just said a kohen cannot contaminate himself, right? But there's an exception. Who can a kohen contaminate himself for? For a relative. So the Jewish people are called, the Zohar says, God's sister who was never married, because we never went to any other god. We were faithful to God, and we never married another god. Okay, there's been some mistakes here and there, but we never married anybody else. So therefore Hashem could, so to speak, become impure to rescue us from exile, because a kohen is allowed to do that. A kohen is allowed to go and to bury his sister. Kohen can become impure for the sake of his sister, so too God is able to come, so to speak, impure to rescue us from exile. But the question is like this. Okay, so God we're also like God's children. So God might be a kohen, but he can rescue us because kohen is allowed to go become impure for the sake of his children. The problem is, God isn't just called a kohen. God is called a kohen gadol. And what do we say before about a kohen gadol? Kohen gadol can't go to anybody. He's not allowed to go to any funeral. Not to his brother, not to his sister, not to his children. So how can Hashem go and take every Jew out of exile and thus become tamei? The Torah says, when you're not a kohen gadol, is not allowed to contaminate himself for anybody. So the answer is like this. Before we get to the answer, I just want to mention a very important point. The Talmud says that if someone kills someone by accident, they're sent to cities of refuge. They go to this city, and they have to live in that city until the kohen gadol dies. They have to go into the city and to be quarantined in the city if someone kills someone by accident. The Torah says, what happens if there's a guy who's teaching a class and his student killed someone by accident? So now this guy has to go to the city of refuge, and the teacher, he's losing his teacher. So the Torah says the teacher has to go with him. He has to go into exile with him. So Bar Shimon Yochai says the same as with God. It says in the Torah, God will return with your captivity. Said Hashem Bar Yochai that when the Jewish people are leaving exile, God leaves exile with them. That means every moment there's a Jew in exile, God's also in exile. There's no such thing as a Jew being in exile by himself. Just like if a Jew is in the city of refuge, his teacher has to be there with him. So too, God, so to speak, stays with us wherever we are. When a Jew has pain, who's saying davening every day, God has pain. It's not like he's sending us to exile and he's somewhere else. He's with us in exile. So, the question again, how is he able to redeem us when that involves becoming ritually impure? So answer this question like this. Every parable the Torah gives to explain some spiritual phenomena isn't perfect. The parable is physical, and therefore the parable can't perfectly encapsulate any spiritual phenomena. So if we're talking about Hashem being a Kohen Gadol, Hashem only has the virtue of a Kohen Gadol, not the deficiency. In Hayom Yom we say, it says Hayom Yom, how come you could say Moda'ani before you wash your hands in the morning? Why can you say Moda'ani before you wash your hands? So the simple reason Shulchan Aruch is because you don't mention God's name. But Hayom Yom says there's a deeper reason why you let us say Moda'ani. You let us say Moda'ani in the morning because that is the connection, the essence of your neshama with Hashem. That's a level which cannot become contaminated. Your hands might be impure, but you're not impure. There's a part of a Jew which is never impure. There's a part of you which is a Kohen Gadol and cannot become impure. So Hashem is like the Kohen Gadol in the sense that he cannot become impure. Even if Hashem takes us out of exile, it doesn't make him impure because Hashem is higher than impurity. When the Gemara asks a question, how could Hashem purify himself? And the Gemara has to answer that Hashem is allowed to do that because a Kohen is allowed to contaminate himself for his sister. The Gemara is talking about a lower level of godliness, the way Hashem contracted his light to a lower level. But you're talking about God's essence, you're talking about Hashem himself, and that level there's no impurity. Even by a Jew who also has a part of him which is a part of God, that also can never become impure. That's why it's an amazing thing. When the Torah introduces the laws of impurity, at the beginning of the parsha, what does it say? Emer alakein nimne'arin, and speak to the Jewish people. Don't just speak to the Kohanim, speak to the Jewish people. Why should you speak to the Jewish people? It's a law for Kohanim. The reason to speak to the Jewish people too, in the simple level, is because the Bezdin, the court, the Jewish people have to be responsible to make sure that no Kohanim go in the wrong places. Hey, what's Master Marcus? But there's a deeper reason. The deeper reason is that every Jew is like a Kohen, every Jew has a part of him that cannot become impure. And the Torah is telling, guard that place. Keep that, know who you are. Know who you are. We were learning this morning in Chassidus, the Mezitcha Magid asked the question, how can Hashem command us to love him? You can't command someone to have a feeling. You feel, you don't feel. So Mezitcha Magid said, when God commands us to love him, what he's really asking us is to think about him. When you think about him, you love him. But the Alter Rebbe asks, it's not a guaranteed. Just because you think about him, that means you'll love him. You'll think about God's greatness. Who says that will touch your heart? So the Alter Rebbe answers like this. It says in the Gemara, you should always study in a place that you love. If you're choosing yeshiva, which yeshiva should you go to? You choose a yeshiva where you like to go to. Which subject should you study? Study a subject in Torah that you like to study. Well, there's exceptions, but that's a general rule. So too, in order for your thinking about Hashem to take you somewhere, you have to make a decision first. What's that decision? The decision is you want to go there. It's like a song. The song is powerful. Nigun is a powerful thing. You have to decide you want to go along with the nigun. And so too, when you want to think about Hashem in a way that will make you feel love for Hashem. If you decide you want to go there, then you'll be taken along with it. So there's a part of us that feels and knows and is one with Hashem. The Torah says, guard that part of you. There's a part of us which is higher than impurity. And that's how it's possible for Hashem to take us out of exile, although Hashem is a Kohen Gadol, because Hashem is only a Kohen Gadol in the sense that he's beyond impurity, but he cannot become impure. It's kind of like it says about leaving Mitzrayim. The Medrash gives the following analogy. Imagine a Kohen has teruma, and that teruma falls into a cemetery. The Kohen says to himself, we shouldn't really do this halachically, but the Kohen says to himself, well, I'm pure. The truma has fallen into this place of impurity. I'll go down to the place of impurity and I'll get the truma because I need the truma. So too Hashem says, I need the Jewish people. So I'll go down and take them out of exile. But the truth is that Hashem does not become impure. He's higher than that. What this really means practically is like this. What this really means is that there's a part of this world right now, there's a space. Let me say in the words of Baba Sali. Baba Sali said, there's a great joy already in Shemayim. They're already celebrating. They're already dancing in Shemayim. Because in Shemayim, in heaven, they already feel Mashiach's arrival. And not only that, but even in Ilm Hazah, the Rebbe said we have to open our eyes and see how Mashiach is here. There's already a place of celebration. There's already Geula has begun in some way. Geula spiritually has begun in some way. The redemption has begun in some way. The Rebbe actually said in the Sikha I'm quoting from, the Rebbe actually said, amazing thing. He said, in Tanya, it says that not everyone can become a tzaddik. Some people are blessed with special souls that can become a tzaddik. Other souls have to fight their whole life. The Rebbe said, now we're at the end of exile, and there's been a purification of Jewish people, and now we've reached a point where every Jew can become a tzaddik. I'm not making it up. You can read it, it's in the script. Every Jew is able to reach the level of a tzaddik. So we have to realize that there is a different kind of koyach, a different kind of energy that Hashem gives us. We're able to reach something. You know, in the Torah, whenever it says a mitzvah, every mitzvah is written in the Torah in a double language. What do I mean? It says in the Torah, you should put on tefillin. Ukshartim. You know what that means also? You will put on tefillin. It says in the Torah, you should love Hashem. You know what that also means? V'ahavta, you will love Hashem. In other words, the Torah is telling us your approach to Judaism has to be that you feel that you're going to win. You feel like this is who you are. This is what your life is about, and you have victory inside. You're not a tzaddik yet, but you know that's who you are. There's no, you know that's what you're capable of being. That's what you're present. That's who you are. You're a kohen gadol. The B'Shim Bar Yochai, he taught Zayar in the Idra. Imagine if you were there. Imagine you were there in the Idra. Imagine you were there in the Idra. Where is the Idra? Where's the Idra now? Where is that space? B'Shim Bar Yochai taught the Zohar. Where is that place? It's everywhere. Everywhere is a place of the Idra. God's everywhere, right? Just the Idra was a place where it was more revealed. So, what I'm trying to say is that there is an oasis of calm in yourself that is Geula, that's redemption. That's spark of Mashiach within you. And Hashem is telling us, the Parshas Emer, talk about it. Speak about Mashiach. Speak about what you believe in. And make it real. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. Anyone have any questions, comments, criticism, tomatoes? Yes, sir.
What's the word by the beginning of Emor? Speaking to the stuff.
Oh, the simple reason is, he's speaking to the Jewish people, they have to protect the Kohanim. The Bezdin has to make sure the Kohanim don't become impure. But it's also perhaps alluding to the fact that all the Jewish people have a connection to this concept, as the Rambam says, to being separate from Gashmias and thinking about what life is about, living a higher life, living like a Kohen. Magdish, the Rambam says, the second you decide to be that way, Magdish Pedish Hashem. It's a decision. It's what you want, where you want to be. Like the Baal Shem Tov said, the Rebbe said it thousands of times. The Baal Shem Tov says, you are where you want to be. Where you want to be, that's where you are. Where are you? And there Baal Shem Tov emphasized, you are completely where you want to be.